Welcome to Drinking on the Edge. I'm its host, David Fuhrer. Drinking on the Edge is a radio-free Rhinecliff show produced by Matt Rosenberg, Jen Hammoud. And joining us today from the left coast of the U.S. are three vintners from Oregon's Rogue Valley. We have a lot of wines to touch upon and taste, and a lot of issues concerning the development of the fine wines that we have from the Rogue Valley. Joining me today with a professional history that crossed paths with mine in the 1990s in Chicago, Craig Camp of Troon Vineyards, a veteran fine wine professional with more than 3 decades of experience in nearly every facet of the wine biz: importing, exporting, distribution, marketing, sales, viticulture, and fine wine production. That's the latest hat that he wears. He's extensive experience in wineries in Italy, Napa Valley, the Willamette Valley. I hear that's another place in Oregon. And also now the Applegate Valley, which we'll talk about a little bit more. The Applegate Valley is a subset, an AVA all to itself, but it's a subset of the Rogue Valley. Okay, he's an industry leader. He presides over the National Board of Directors of the Rhone Rangers and is VP of the Oregon Wine Growers Association, while once having served as president of the aforementioned Applegate Valley Vintners Association. Welcome, Craig Camp.
Great to be here, David. Great to see you again.
Oh, yeah. And also someone I'm only casually familiar with, but have really enjoyed his wines, having tasted them occasionally over the last few years, Herb Quady. The name Quady should be familiar to those of you who are fans of left coast wines. He grew up in California's Central Valley at his family's eponymous wine estate, later working with the famed Randall Graham at Bonnie Doon Vineyard. After completing his viticulture and enology studies in 2003, he and his young family moved north to Southern Oregon to join its burgeoning wine industry, first working at Cowhorn Vineyard. They make some good grapes there. And later as winemaker for Craig Camp's Troon Vineyard. But in 2006, he planted Mays Vineyard, also in the Applegate Valley, where he founded Quady North Winery, producing many Rhone-style wines. He also looks after Applegate Vineyard Management, for which he farms about 80 acres of live, sustainable, and organic certified vineyards, and is a managing partner in Barrel 42, a live certified custom crush facility for he and his neighbors. Welcome, Herb.
Thank you.
And last but not least, joining us today is Ted Gerber. And as owner of Foris Vineyards, he began growing grapes in 1978, selling them commercially to wineries across the Pacific Northwest. But in 1986, he began producing wine from what's now 4 ranches of 188 acres of planted grapes, set amongst very bucolic flatlands, forests, and timber-filled hillsides. And when French clones of Pinot Gris, Pinot Blanc, and Gewürztraminer were first imported and then sanitized in Oregon, he was one of 6 growers in the state to have received them. So this pioneer initially experimented and commercialized Pinot Noir and Gewürztraminer going back to the mid-1980s as Oregon's southernmost wine producer and at one of Oregon's highest elevations, a position which helps to ensure regular diurnal temperature shifts, which helps preserve the lovely acidity in these Rogue Valley grapes. Welcome, Ted Gerber. Okay, that's a lot of lead up. So let me just ask this simple, broad question, and you can all jump in. No order required. What is the Rogue Valley?
I think one thing is, this is actually a pretty good panel here because the Rogue Valley is quite diverse. It extends all the way from the California border to, another probably 70, 80 miles north, and encompasses both Jackson and Josephine counties. So you have everywhere from very hot, very dry areas in the interior to slightly cooler and wetter areas that go further west. In the Rogue Valley, we grow dozens and dozens of different varieties, everywhere from Alvarita to Zinfandel and everything in between. And it's right on the California border in southwest Oregon. So it's quite different generally from the wetter known Willamette Valley, but maybe has some similarities to eastern Oregon's like Walla Valley, for example, in terms of diurnal shifts and heat units, variety thrown, et cetera.
I could say that the Rogue Valley one was started in 1989. There were meetings of growers, and we decided to focus on everything that drained into the Rogue River. And although our valley it wasn't the Rogue Valley, it's the Illinois Valley, and then it's the Applegate Valley, and anything that drained into that Rogue River was part of the appellation. There was confusion. A couple growers out by me didn't want to call it Rogue because that's a mad elephant. And there was hope that there could be enough wineries to create an appellation. And at that time, when it first started, there were very few wineries, but now it's grown. And there's the diversity of the east side being hot and dry, and the west side, like where we are, is but much more moist. It goes from almost 70 inches of rain on the west side of the Rogue to as low as 8 or 9 inches of rain on the east side of the Rogue. So you get plenty of diversity in this appellation.
Though I think Rogue is a fantastic name for an AVA. It's quite attractive. Had you chosen Mad Elephant, I think that would have been even better. But
you could have the Russian River, and that's never really caused any conflict.
Well, we'll see what happens with the next possible presidential administration. You never can tell. So look at Ted, I forgot to mention, you and I were briefly acquainted during my first ever visit to the Rogue Valley. You were on my itinerary. We did meet. I got to hear a little bit about your history as well, which is well documented on your website. Thanks for mentioning all that. You have a colorful, interesting past. But I got to hear it firsthand when I visited you. Oh gosh, early 2000. It is indeed a lovely setting. That's why I was happy to mention all that. So diversity is a point that's come up already, and this is something that is quite striking. Though certain American AVAs are known for one variety or a couple varieties, Rogue's strengths, I would argue, is in its diversity. That's quite exemplified by the so many different types of wines I was sent to enjoy with you here tonight, and of course over the weekend with friends. But this is the strength that I've discovered. I mean, for example, our one guest who was unable to join, Eric Weisinger of his family estate, another pioneering Rogue Valley estate. I believe they have the oldest Gewürztraminer vines in all of Oregon. I know that Eric was involved in a Tempranillo conference. It happened a few times there. I was invited to come speak at one time with a few other friendly media folk. And Tempranillo is the thing. It still is. And I believe I have errors here to even reflect upon that. But there's more than that. There's so many other varieties. Ted, you've sent some things that are reflective of your background. Pinot Noir, which is a grape variety that's brought Oregon justifiable recognition internationally. But what a lot of people don't know is that a fair amount of that Oregon Pinot Noir, which gets labeled as Oregon Pinot Noir, but bottled in the Willamette Valley, is actually grown quite well in the Rogue and Applegate areas. So there's a lot going on in Rogue that people just don't know about. And I know that Craig and Herb have made their mark, for the most part, but not exclusively, with the Rhônish varieties, and to really good effect, I've come to learn. And as well, they're also pioneers in their area for natural wine production, biodynamic growing, and all these things that are popular. It took a long time to get there, but they are popular now. So again, I blathered on about diversity. Gentlemen, talk about what you're all doing.
I think it's important about this region is the Siskiyou Mountain area region that we're in is one of the most biodiverse in the world, and also in soil types, incredibly biodiverse because of the geology of the area and the way it was formed. And we're a transitional area, so we're warmer and drier than Willamette Valley, but cooler and wetter than Northern California. So you see that transition happen through our zone, like we were mentioning with the different rainfalls. So through this area, even though it's a relatively small area, you see an incredibly diverse range of growing conditions and soil types, which makes it ideal for this incredibly wide range of varieties. I always think of Provence and Languedoc in France, where you see these broad ranges of different grape varieties. And I think that very much connects with our wine growing here in the Rogue Valley. So that's why you see Rhone varieties and every type of variety you can think of grows well here in some place.
Do you think that perhaps the initial rush with the Alsace varieties that Ted enjoyed and the Weisingers enjoyed in the earlier days, do you think the diversity of the soils that you just mentioned, Craig, had a function of drawing the Alsace variety, simply because Alsace is also well known for its diverse soil types?
I think you have to learn. If you're coming into a new wine growing region, experimentation is the key to discovering what grows best in your vineyard. We can't say just because we compare ourselves to someone in France doesn't mean that we're actually like that area. We need to find our own way, and you can't do that without experimentation. But now the Rogue and the Applegate have been established for decades, and I think you see the various sections really focusing down on the varieties that do best for them.
I think it's here. Right. Oh, I was going to say, Ted probably has some really good input on this because I remember talking to Dick Troon and also Roger Lane, who were other pioneers. And a couple of things, one thing they said is one, it used to be colder. Two, it used to be wetter. And so Alsatian varieties were hardy. They were tough. Bud out late, ripen early, you could avoid the frost. And so those were recommended early on. And they're totally sold today, but there was some good reasons, some practical reasons for that too, early.
When I first came, it was actually 74, I started planting. And the experiment station, the earliest ripening varieties were Pinot Noir and Gewürztraminer. So I thought, if we have any chance, because you really can't ripen anything north of Mendocino County was the thought at that time. And so I chose early ripeners. And the last thing we pick these days is Gewürztraminer and Riesling. Because you don't want a simple white wine. You want something that'll hit you over the head with a baseball bat. And so you need to get them fully ripe. And it seems as if there's one other reason I'm moving towards whites is forest fires. And whites don't show smoke taint like Pinot Noir is the worst one to show smoke taint. And over 50% of our vineyards are planted in Pinot Noir. But I think the future for where I am, because of the acidity you can hold in white wines, may be more towards the white wine varietals.
If your 2023 Riesling, which I just tasted here, is any indication, you have a very bright, clean Riesling that you were able to produce here. Just out of curiosity, was that put through any malolactic fermentation?
No, never in whites for us.
Okay, good to know. Then you have a lot of expression without the mallow. Good for that. Did you care to say anything more, Ted, about your situation with growing weight varieties versus reds now? Or is this you think is a factor of climate change and the forest fires that have become more frequent? I remember coming up to visit for that aforementioned Tempranillo conference, driving up from Sacramento where there were fires in Northern California and they continued into the Rogue Valley as I was there on the periphery. A lot of smoke in the air. It was pretty nasty. I can understand why you'd be concerned about that.
Yeah, the whites do well, but you don't build a reputation very well on whites. You want that trophy wine to sit on your mantle and bring in more money. And you go to a grocery store and they really don't have a Gewürztraminer section, but they have a Chardonnay section. And so the white varietals are hard to have on a shelf, can move much volume and can support a winery unless you build a big reputation, unless you're from Alsace and you're Trimbach or somebody like that. But you don't see too many white wine notarized vineyards in the United States that they build a reputation and people flock to them, other than Anderson Valley's done a little bit of work on that. And that's the hope in the future, maybe another generation or two, the white wines will show here and support the place.
We'll be talking about the reds soon enough. I thought it was as a nod to Eric, who couldn't join us. His 2023, again, after having had your 2023 Riesling, I'm open to Sauvignon Blanc. When I opened it earlier, the melon, the warm-ish character that you get from some certain Sauvignons, melon on the nose is right there, the honeydew melon. However, now it's transformed to like ripe red grapefruit. I haven't even tasted it. So there's a lot going on in the Weisinger Sauvignon Blanc here.
Wish I had some.
Sauvignon Blanc has promise here for sure. It's a popular variety, and we've been making a little Sauvignon Blanc for ourselves and for clients, and it shows a nice, more towards the tropical side generally, which I think is refreshing considering how many sort of quite green Sauvignon Blancs are out there. That's another totally solid variety for this area.
Let's talk about the two whites from that you provided me, Herb and Craig. Craig, I have to admit that the Roussanne, you sent it so early that I just had to open it a few days ago when it arrived. If it's well made, and I trust that yours was, would actually open up and show a little bit more expression, especially for a young vintage like your 2022, to be even more. We'll find out in just a moment. But first, we're going to try here the Quady North, the Pistolet. It's a blend of Rhônish grapes. Talk us through it, Herb.
Roussanne, Marsanne, Viognier, and Grenache Blanc. Yes, Rhonish varieties native to the Rhone Valley. I say a lot of different wines being made here. Some vintages are different every year, obviously, and some varieties shine in different vintages, but white, pink, and red Rhone blends, they definitely tend to do well every year because you can make adjustments, right? So you can, in a warm year, Viognier will be very ripe. You can tone that down with Roussanne and Marsanne. In a cool year, you can use more of it. So it's a very dependable, very solid white wine for the area. We use a variety of different vessels and fermentation. It is no malo, but it's fermented in a mixture of cacio pesto, acacia wood, neutral large French oak, and stainless steel.
Excuse my ignorance. What is Cacio pesto?
Cacio pesto is a form of amphora. So instead of being thrown clay, it is molded with a plaster interior and an aggregate center. So the nice thing about it is that it's like handling wise, it's a little bit more versatile. You can have doors and valves and lids that seal, but it basically acts like an amphora.
Got it. I've seen it in catalogs. I wasn't familiar with the name. Thank you for that. It's a lovely, delicate floral blend. Delicate, but not weak, not in the least. And I'm sorry, I didn't check the vintage. I should. Also 2023. Prices can be fun wine. I look forward to trying it in a couple of days. I got a sense that this is going to go through a nice transformation as well. Craig, your Roussanne from the Applegate Valley. It's from the Troon Vineyard, the aforementioned winery that you look after. So this is all estate grape.
Yeah, so we're all estate bottled now. We have had to go through a replanting process. All the beautiful work that Herb did years ago was devastated by a virus, red blotch virus. So we had to replant the vineyard. So we went through a process of soil testing and our own experience to really focus on a group of varieties for this site. And we focused on all Southern French varieties, many of which Herb had already pioneered here and convinced us of the potential for the site. So Roussanne was one of those. And I think this is a great example of our growing conditions here, where we have at our altitude, as far north as we are, we have a compacted growing season that we're able to ripen these Rhone varieties because we have very long days that allow for photosynthesis. But then at harvest, the days get very short, the nights get very cold. So we can let fruit hang, let the flavors develop without the alcohols going up or losing acidity. So here you see a wine at 11.5% alcohol that has a lot of depth, a lot of flavor and balance. This was totally fermented in a concrete egg. Very simple winemaking. We harvest, and this was then whole cluster pressed into stainless steel, settled overnight, and then into concrete where it fermented and went through 100% malt lactic for over 10 months in concrete.
Interesting, Craig. When I opened this and enjoyed it and I really did a few nights ago, it had a suppleness that was immensely enjoyable. Some Roussannes can be very exuberantly aromatic. This one was not. It was much more moderate to my taste. Today, a few days after having first opened it, the suppleness is there, but it's a little bit diminished. And coming up is a little bit more of a firmness, a minerality, for lack of a better word, a sense of structure that was not so clear at the first. So it's going through changes, and sometimes Roussanne can go in and out of different things too. How do you reckon this will be in a few more days, presuming I don't finish it tonight?
I think as a general rule, if you look at wines from the Rogue Valley and the pHs and the structure that we get, that they do hold up well in the bottle. These are the wines from our region. I think you can drink them days later and you'll notice almost no movement in the wine. And I think that's because of the great balance that we're able to attain in this climate. Since this is the first vintage of Roussanne we ever made in concrete, I will not profess to know the exact aging bell curve on the wine, but I believe that this wine will age well for 3 to 5 years.
Okay, that takes care of the whites for the moment. But I remember in your notes here, Craig, you'd asked that you wanted to speak to the unique position of the Rogue Valley as a transitional point of climate between that of Willamette and Northern California. Can you elaborate about that a bit?
Ted over in Illinois Valley, which is very cool, actually more similar to Willamette than we would be. And then I've not farmed in the Rogue. Herb can speak to that. but where you get a much more California drier climate style. So you get this huge transition in a very small area. But the fact is that where in Northern California, there's a narrower range of varieties, and obviously in Willamette Valley, there's a really narrow range of varieties. So as for here, we have this ability because of this transitional zone where you get very different microclimates to produce a really wide range of varieties. But you see this basic structure of higher acidity, moderate alcohols, and these wines with the more, in many ways, to me, it feels like a more classic European style in general for wines from this area than you would get from most areas on the West Coast.
What's your take on that, Herb?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. So at Quady North, we have our estate vineyard. Most of our fruit does come from the Applegate, but we do have a couple of vineyards in the Rogue Valley. And then we have all these clients with vineyards in the Rogue Valley. So sometimes if I go and sampled fruit, I might start near Merlin, for example, which is north and west. And it'll be cool, very mild there. It's next to the Rogue Valley, but definitely quite a bit west. I might end the day in something like the east of I-5, east of Medford, for example. And in between, go through the Applegate. And the contrast is really striking. If you stand in the Applegate Valley, for example, it's sunny. It's always sunny in the Applegate, but it's windy, breezy. You always get this sort of cooling, especially during harvest. If you go to the Rogue Valley, for example, and again, you're up above I-5, it feels warm. The air is more still. There is the urban asphalt effect, right? More of a heat sink there. And then at night, it's particularly warmer. The best way you can see this, you illustrate this, is with certain varieties. So if you take a variety, let's say, that's on the late edge, like Grenache Noir or Cabernet Sauvignon, and you...
Like this one here.
Sure. And that's for rosé, which is mostly Applegate there, but it's still ill. But that's why we use Applegate fruit, Applegate Grenache for rosé. But if you take it as a red wine, for example, and you try to pick, and you're picking Grenache from the Rogue Valley, your Grenache you get from Bear Creek will have a profile which is more identifiable from what we usually see as red Grenache. Something that tastes a little bit like Baccarat or Northern Spain, but slightly darker, a little bit more pencil-lead, right? That same fruit from the Applegate, it's going to be lighter, brighter on the same day. And so that's your main, and there's some soil influence in there too, but I really feel a lot of it has to do with nighttime temperatures, cumulative effect, many days where it's warmer at night if you go 20 miles east than it is if you go 40 miles west, right? And that there's your spectrum right there. And it hits across every single variety, and it really shows diversity. And it's one reason why you have many different varieties possible with many different expressions.
A few weeks ago, I was in Romagna, Italy, and yesterday in Manhattan, just coincidentally, some of the vintners had a gathering there as well to promote the wines of the region of Italy. And one of the things that people were talking about, all sorts of aspects of what constitutes terroir, but one of the things that was left out of the conversation that I brought up in this gathering was that of wind, the prevailing winds and the ones that are unexpected. They're located more on the Adriatic side. And so because of the nature of the Adriatic versus the Western Tyrrhenian part of the Mediterranean, that has an impact upon their microclimate as well, different than the Sangiovese that they grow from what's grown in Tuscany, the better known Tuscany. So what, if any, wind effects come to play in the Rogue Valley that help to cause its uniqueness?
We have alpine effects, right? And we have onshore, offshore effects. And both of those sort of combine. And I think the Ted's region is going to have a different wind effect, but the Applegate really is known for this afternoon breeze, comes up about 3 o'clock. It heightens, depending on where you are, it can get quite strong. My vineyard is, especially where the winery's at, very strong breezes every afternoon, cools things down. It also devigors vines, and it can create some secondary characteristics like rotundone in Syrah, which has a peppery character.
Ted, what do you reckon, especially at your elevation? How are things with you and the winds?
The winds make our climate here. And what they do is we get hot days. We get days as hot as Medford. And you wouldn't think where we are, because the elevation's a little bit more, but not a whole lot more than over by the central Rogue Valley. And to the west of us is a mountain range, wilderness area, Kalmiopsis wilderness area. And it's about, I would say, 3,000 to 4,000 feet in elevation. It's a couple thousand feet higher than our elevation. So what happens, we get the hot days here in the valley, and the air goes up, and
The warm air goes up, yeah.
It sucks the ocean breezes, ocean temperatures over the hill, which is why it cools down at night from here. So the wind isn't really the effect on the vineyard, although we do get afternoon breezes at the vineyard, but it's what it does for the climate of the area, sucking in that cool ocean temperature every night because of the rising temperatures during the day.
Do you reckon because of your elevation and your general position that you have more, should we say, more severe temperature shifts than your neighbors further down?
I think the Illinois Valley probably has one of the more severe temperature shifts on the West Coast. I know that our elevation can make a difference. I had a previous winemaker, Brian Wilson, and he always talked about Pinot
Love
Noir.
his music.
Well, he wasn't music, but he was a good winemaker. Different Brian Wilson. And he always talked about how the Illinois Valley was halfway between the Sonoma Coast and Willamette Valley, if you get a little turn. But in terms of space and what the Sonoma Coast and the Willamette Valley can do for Pinot Noir, he felt we were halfway in between, and we had characteristics of both ends of that. And I believe that the elevation that we have here is much higher than both those places. So the elevation does something, but I really think that wind, that afternoon and lift of the temperature makes a lot of what our climate is here and where we grow the grapes.
It certainly would have an opportunity to mitigate the chance of frost that I understand that Herb has said is an issue for him, both spring and fall. Is that true? True?
I have more frost problems than I think anybody else here. I was selling Pinot clone material to California, and Kendall Jackson wanted some stuff. They couldn't find Chardonnay. They were so late in the season. And what I finally figured out is our elevation, we're about the last place to bud out in the spring. So that helps us with frost. It being a little bit late to bud out because of the coolness we have. But I think that the frost is a big part of. I have wind machines and overhead sprinklers in almost every vineyard, or all our vineyards.
If you had 2022 that did your Pinot Noir no harm whatsoever, as along with Craig's wines that arrived from Troon early on, so did yours early enough for me to open your Pinot Noir and enjoy, along with a friend, nearly half the bottle. Soft, supple. It's maybe not going to last forever, but the wine has got plenty going on at the moment. It's quite vibrant even now after being open for 2 days, excuse me. So this 2022 Pinot Noir, I congratulate you. It's a very lovely bottle.
It's easy to make. Just find a good winemaker and stand back.
I'm sure cultivation of the grapes has something to do with it too.
Yeah.
We skipped over the Grenache Rosé, even though we alluded to it casually there with Herb. That's a really understated Grenache Rosé. I've had ones that are a bit more mouthfilling. This is not. And as we were talking about earlier, the lowest alcohols of the area, this is clocking into 11.4. So it's almost like drinking a beer.
Yeah. So that's almost all Applegate Valley. There's a little bit of fruit from the Rogue Valley. There's some drawdown off of some of the red Grenache fruit of the Rogue Valley, but it's almost all direct crush to press from my vineyard and the Ironbird vineyard in the Applegate Valley, and some from Steelhead Run vineyard in that year. But there you go. That's the Applegate Valley Grenache for you. And again, it's throttled way back by low soil vigor, those afternoon winds, cold nights. The Grenache does not have a chance to get ahead of steam, build up a lot of sugar, and it retains acid really well. So it's a very natural variety for rosé here. And I've also had success with making red wine from Grenache, but it's definitely in a lighter, brighter, juicier style, the chillable red style. And as far as frost goes, I think Ted's right. Illinois Valley, they're known for being frosty, but basically my first year at Troon, Dick told me last full moon in May. And I don't know what it is about the full moon, but he's right. For last frost this year was the last full moon in May. First frost this year was the last full moon in October, which was not, it was nearly a frost, but it was definitely our first super cold night. And there's our season right there between two full moons. And that's the way it is so many years. So you got maybe 5 months of frost free. If you got frost protection, then you can add some weeks on both sides. But some of those mornings are, even for overhead fans, even for fans, it's tough.
I think Dick Troon had the best frost control method that I've ever heard of. It was get a good glass of brandy and drink it and go to bed and hope everything's all right in the morning.
The other thing he told me too is that, that was what he did for frost protection. Yeah, have a glass of brandy and say a prayer is what he said.
Craig, we have here your Amphora Mourvedre. You've chosen to label it as such, as Amphora Mourvedre. Interesting marketing decision, which...
Yeah, we're famous for interesting marketing decisions, but...
what led to this one?
I think the name is we're just seeking to be clear. We expect, as I mentioned, we're replanting. So our Mourvedre is just coming back into production now. So this was our first bottling, and we wanted to emphasize the young fruit of these, just the first vintage vines. And so we aged it in amphora and for 10 months to get it out early. It's 25% Grenache also, because actually we didn't have enough Mourvedre to fill both amphora. So we included some Grenache in the blend. But a very small production. But I think you see here that we're talking about diurnal shifts and that impact and the wind coming up. So you could have 100-degree days, and about 3 or 4 o'clock, the wind will kick in. And then if people are out at 9 or 10 at night, you've got to put a coat on. So it's a really interesting area, but it gives you that freshness in the wine you taste in this 13.5 alcohol. It's about the higher end for us. But the whole idea of the amphora was to emphasize that bright freshness and the crispness of the wine. And we gave it a separate name because we fully expect to have a different style of Mourvedre to bottle in the future, but we'll probably keep making this one too.
I absolutely concur about the freshness of this wine, whether or not it's because of the high proportion of Grenache on the nose. It's got this lovely, delicate, Mourvedre, sage, rosemary smell going on. I said, okay, yeah, definitely it's Mourvedre, but doesn't have the heaviness, density, and sometimes ripping tannins that a young Mourvedre would otherwise have. And using Grenache to balance that would certainly allow a count.
And I would say heaviness, density, and ripping tannins are not characteristics of wines from our region. We have these very, I think, elegance, and there's a silkiness to the tannins here. That's why I think that you see a lot of people not using a lot of new oak in their wines, because we already have these delicate, elegant tannins already, because of this ability to let the fruit hang at the end of the season and let your phenolics really mature. So I think there's a really distinct style to this region, and you're seeing it in all the wines you're tasting today.
Indeed. Herb, you have the last 2 wines we have here to go through are 2 that you've sent, and 2 very different types. One is Syrah and one is a Bordeaux-ish blend. Which would you like to talk about first?
Bordeaux-ish blend, is that the Bataille Cap Franc?
It is.
I would call that more of a Loire-ish blend, actually.
I sit corrected.
Yeah. In any case, and partially because of how it's made as well. But in any case, let's talk about the Syrah first.
This is one of your wines that I've had previously, and it was the first one I think I maybe tried from you. I was doing some classes in my early days, my New York relocation, the famed Murray's Cheese Shop on Bleecker Street.
Oh yeah, Bill Murray's Cheese. Yeah.
Yes, and I forget exactly what it was I was doing class on. It could have been Rogue, it could have been Syrah, I forget what it was. Yeah. But your local distributor was kind enough in your support sending some bottles for that. Yeah. And I said, whoa, that's some damn good Syrah.
Yeah, cool. Yeah, Syrah is, if there's a variety for the Applegate Valley that delivers every year, it's Syrah. And it just is in a sweet spot. And Ted was talking about fires and how white varieties show less smoke influence. I would say he's absolutely right. And the exception on the red varieties is Syrah. We've had some sort of smoke fire effect almost every year. but you wouldn't know it by trying a lot of these Syrahs, depending upon how it's made and so forth. And it's interesting too, like what Craig was saying about tannins. So my first year was 2004, and I came from the, I don't know, so the California school, and Parker was still in effect. And my marching orders also from my employer was to make these really big red wines. And so we definitely restricted irrigation. We did a lot of maceration, a lot of extraction. And I did make actually a lot of red wines with ripping tannins that honestly took forever to come around. But my impression with that was like, okay, I need to change. And so I changed my approach. And I think the approach that I use, is similar to what Nate's approach is different. But one thing we both, I think, definitely
Nate is currently working with Craig at
Nate
Wall,
the winemaker at Troon. I was just saying our approach to winemaking is now, I think, more gentle. And so that is one of the, also a reason why some of these tannins are silkier and so forth, because we do get pretty thick skins here, and we can, if you're not irrigating, have pretty small berries. So there is the potential for bigger red wines. But in any case, Syrah, super dependable in the Applegate Valley, does very well on sites and soils. The ripening period aligns well. And it does, I think, benefit from these afternoon winds, because it does tend to dial it back. It does devigorate a little bit. And because it gets cooler at the right time, the savory notes of Syrah come out more than just the real big fruit alcohol notes that we're familiar with from other regions.
True that. Your Syrah is nothing if not vibrant. And sorry, the word you were using was savory. Thank you. It is that as well. And those stick in my mind from the one that I tried a few years back. This is 2020 vintage. It is over 14%, but who cares? There's plenty backing up the alcohol, shall we say. And then your Loire-ish blend?
Yeah, the Loire-ish red called La Bataille. So La Bataille, the name is a nod to the battle we faced when trying to sell these wines, which are here. What are you going to do with a Cab Franc Malbec blend, which is made in the style of the Loire Valley? Where on the shelf does that go exactly, right? So that's the battle. But it is co-fermented, and I'm using native yeast in concrete tank with the Malbec as full cluster, and doing some interesting things there in early press, like an early drain and return, trying to basically raise the ratio of juice to skins in there to, again, dial the tannin back a little bit, make it a little bit brighter, juicier, press off early, and then age in neutral French oak.
I think you succeeded in blending here. For me, one of the great hallmarks of a great blend is that not one variety sticks out too much, and that you've certainly succeeded in this. Congratulations. And it's not a tannic monster. None of these wines are. It's elegant tannins, as we've all spoken of, and even this has a structure to go. What was the vintage on this? Just to be clear, it is 2021. So in the context, this is to everybody again. In general terms, the Rogue has a few things going for it. We've spoken about the beautiful lands, the nature reserves nearby, the lands you're growing upon, the generally very good weather that you do enjoy in this part of the world. And you also have in Ashland, a world-famous, a world-renowned Shakespeare festival that draws a lot of people from, again, all over the world to Ashland. But you can't speak of Oregon wine and not mention in some capacity the Willamette, and we have. It's a challenge promoting these wines, good as they are, in the shadows, shall we say, of the 400-pound gorilla that is your Willamette Valley. How is it you differentiate yourself and let people know that our wines are worthy wines? They're wines to be taken seriously in the context of what is the entirety of Oregon. You should not look at Oregon as only painted with one brush of Pinot Noir.
I find it almost the opposite, is that Oregon now is so established as an important wine growing region that when we go out into other markets, people are excited to find another Oregon wine that's made from a different variety, from a different style, with a different place name. I think that our wines that you're showing here today are sold across the country in various markets. And that because of the brand Oregon itself has become so strong And people realize that Oregon wines are different than Washington wines and different than California wines. And they're looking for different expressions of these varieties. And also because of our wines having naturally lower alcohols and more freshness, that fits into what the consumer is looking for today. These more balanced wines that you can enjoy every day with your meals.
Interesting, actually, the three wineries you have represented today, and then I would add also Del Rio Vineyard. I'm trying to think of Calmore a little bit, but these are maybe the few of the only few wineries that really do distribute nationally. And I often find myself when I go around with Foris being one of the only other Southern Oregon wineries that people do know, actually. And then more recently, Troon.
So Ted, what's been like selling your Pinot Noir, which I've just mentioned I really enjoyed? Are you able to sell it as an Oregon Pinot Noir, or do you face pushback from people who are surprised to know that you're not in Willamette Valley?
We've had both sides of that question. We've had, when I first started, you're too hot in Southern Oregon, Rogue Valley. You can't grow Pinot Noir. So we started buying Bordeaux grapes from the east side of us where it's warmer and made Bordeaux wines to sell to the north end of the state. And all our Pinot Noir, which was all our production, went to a Washington winery that sold it in 8, and that helped. When we go to, we're in Japan, and Japan, our distributor, it's a nice, old, big distributor. And if you could just put Willamette on the bottle, they could get twice the prices, they keep telling us. And it's, so we run into the wall of that. But I've always thought about, you got this jumbo jet and you got this little plane flying underneath. And Oregon, the jumbo jet Willamette Valley has helped pull us and other places.
Yeah, these are important factors to consider when you're in the business of producing wines and running a business from that. The Rogue Valley is, I'm a little sorry to say, even after all these years and a lot of excellent work being done on many levels, is still a relatively undiscovered area for fine wine production. As we talked about today, shows a huge amount of diversity with strengths on all levels. We've alluded to with so many of these lovely wines we've had here today. I strongly recommend that you seek out the Quady North, the Troon Vineyard, and the Foris Vineyards, and the Weisinger Family Estate wines when you can and whenever you can. They all have websites, and you can have them shipped to whatever state you might be in. Perhaps they're already in the 3-tiered system in your state. They may even be exported in the country you're tuning in from. We have listeners from Japan and Spain and Australia too. We do have people downloading this podcast from all sorts of places. So please enjoy these Rogue Valley wines. Visit the Rogue Valley if and when you're able to do so. Oh, and one last thing. There seems to be a whole lot of organic and biodynamic growing compared to its neighboring areas. This is an interesting trend, and it's gotten a lot of deserved press coverage for just that here in the United States and abroad. I know that Decanter has also mentioned that y'all in some capacities in this as well about this.
I think your listeners will find the wine from this area really compelling and really different from wines they've tasted from the West Coast of the region of the West Coast of the United States. And incredibly good values too. So drink Rogue Valley.
I hear at Forest Vineyards, it's taken 50 years and I'm still discovering who I am. What I thought it was when I first started planning, it's not that. And it's an evolution.
Y'all are writing history.
I think it's great. It's been a pleasure being with you, David, and with Craig and Ted. And I always we actually do like each other. Although I didn't get to see Ted that often, man, out there in the Illinois Valley. But,
way out there in the Illinois Valley.
Yeah, I know. But in any case, one thing I have to say is we've been up and coming for decades. But in every time I go out, the very first time I used to go out and be like, what, Southern Oregon, where's that? Eugene to, oh yeah, I've heard of it, to now, oh yeah, I've had this wine from the Southern Oregon and I've loved it. And that is the evolution I've seen, and it's really exciting. And I think the region has arrived. The wines are compelling. And so I think you'll start seeing some more of these wines in your local wine shop. If you have a steward that you work with, ask him. Ask he or she to bring something in, bring one of these wines in, because that's how it happens.
Hey, gentlemen, anytime you come to the Hudson Valley, you're more than welcome. Happy to receive you steps away from an Amtrak station. Thank you very much for drinking on the edge.
Thank you, David.
Thank you.